Usually I try to make arguments for cinema cameras that I think are good investments, especially for new filmmakers who are trying to start their careers. This is the first camera I've made a video about that I actually have a hard time recommending for everyone, and at the same time, I think it's one of the greatest achievements in digital filmmaking history. This is well documented on the internet already, and now I can add my voice to the cacophony. This battery is terrifying. On my best day, I got an hour and 5 minutes of raw recording on a new battery that I pulled out of the plastic, and on my worst day, with an other fully charged battery that I guess was a little bit older, I had enough time to pop it in, format an SD card, and it died. I'm talking like 30 seconds. Now granted, this is probably because it's an old battery, but if you're going to be buying one of these used on eBay, you'll have to keep that in mind. Batteries degrade after a while, and this camera is over 10 years old at this point. If you're going to be carrying this around town casually and using it as a pocket cinema camera, you'll probably need to buy a couple brand new batteries and switch them out every once in a while, which isn't nearly as bad as it sounds. You totally get used to it. I can't recommend doing the old tactical reload option if you're using this guy in a professional setting though. But there is some good news. On the side of the camera, there is a 12-volt DC in, which means you can power the camera externally. It seems like most of the community prefers to pick up a battery plate, NPFs are really common, and just run an external battery for all-day battery life. The plates are really cheap, and a lot of us have NPFs laying around already. I decided to tempt fate and use only the internal batteries because I really want to test out a camera that's an actual pocket cinema camera. The second problem is the onboard monitor. It's a really old panel, so naturally it's not the sharpest or brightest screen in the entire world. In a lot of cases it works perfectly well, but if you're filming in daylight, you might have some trouble. Running an external monitor is a popular fix for this, although unfortunately there's no full-size HDMI. We have this tiny little micro port. I would strongly recommend getting a cage that has some kind of cable clamp to keep this connection secure, otherwise this will absolutely break and probably quickly. A lot of filmmakers also like to use magnetic viewfinders in order to see the monitor in bright conditions, which is certainly a cool option. I have neither, so we're just going to do the best with what we have. The last challenge that comes along with using the OG Pocket Cinema is also the best thing about the camera, the sensor. The infamous Fairchild Super 16 Full HD sensor that sits behind a Micro Four Thirds lens mount. We'll get to the happy stuff in a second, but a huge possible downside to this sensor is its crop factor. Since this is Super 16, you can expect around a 2.88 times crop to whatever lens you attach, and this can pose some challenges for filmmakers, especially if you're shooting with vintage lenses, as the wider ones are usually more rare and expensive. Luckily these days, there's a wealth of lens options for Micro Four Thirds for almost all focal lengths and all budgets. I went with the hilariously small Lumix 14mm f2.5, which works out to be around a 40mm equivalent field of view. If you're able to work with these three major challenges, you will be handsomely rewarded with a fantastic image. It's crazy that all these years later, it still looks so good. Your maximum resolution is 1920 by 1080, a particularly robust 1080 at that. I think it looks better than a lot of 4K images, honestly. Blackmagic reports 13 stops of dynamic range coming out of the sensor, and while I can't add anything technical to that, I can anecdotally say that the dynamic range is great. There's plenty of room to reach into the shadows and retain highlights to your heart's content. Rolling shutter is another non-issue. I don't have a millisecond reading, but I never noticed any jello in any of my footage. The noise floor isn't the lowest I've ever seen, and this sensor certainly loves to have plenty of light to play with, but I also really like the noise pattern. I find it to be granular and filmic. If you push it really far, you might see a fixed noise pattern, which we really want to avoid. Color science is mostly what people talk about. Lots of users actually say they prefer these colors over Blackmagic's current lineup of cameras. I haven't been able to shoot them side by side to compare them carefully, but I do love the way the footage looks out of the original Pocket. Gradients transition smoothly, and tones are gentle and nuanced. Skin tones look healthy and more impressive. Underexposed skin tones look natural instead of ready. A lot of this has to do with the selection of recording codecs. Somehow back in 2013, Blackmagic managed to put 4 different flavors of Apple ProRes as well as Cinema DNG into this little guy, all high-end professional recording formats. ProRes looks fantastic and of course behaves wonderfully in a timeline. Cinema DNG isn't as common as it used to be, but certainly still usable. If you've never worked with Cinema DNG before, it can look kind of scary when you get it into your file explorer. Here's my memory card right here, and instead of clips, you have these weird folders. You have like the audio file, and then you have individual raw frames that you can edit like you would a raw photo. They're DNG files. This is kind of weird and it makes it hard to view them, but if you head over to DaVinci Resolve and then we go over here to our media tab and you just open up that SD card here, all of them display as regular files. Cinema DNG back in the day was kind of hard to run and work with, but these days I have a baseline 14-inch MacBook Pro. It's an M1 Pro chip, and when you press play it, there's no drop frames. It works perfectly. It's 1600. My wife's face here is pretty well underexposed, actually. So we're maxing out the ISO range on this sensor, and it's sort of notoriously bad in low light. Yeah, it's a little bit noisy. There's some stuff you can do in here. Shift S, add a node before, come into our denoising. Usually if I'm doing something really quick and dirty, then I will unlink the Luma and Chroma on the spatial threshold and just turn the Chroma up just a little bit. And now we've gotten rid of that Chroma noise. This is an amazing image if you ask me. For underexposed at 1600 ISO, the noise is well controlled. The noise that's there, you could denoise very easily, and Resolve will take it out because it's so granular. It has an easy time with it. If you want to leave the noise in there, I actually recorded a lot of footage in 1600 ISO intentionally so I could kind of like overcrank and get some extra noise in there because I think it looks really nice. All these tones are really gentle back here. There's picking up some greens, a little bit of orange in the trees behind. Her hair is falling into a little bit of an unnatural saturation because it's underexposed and it looks a little bit more intense. You could lower the global saturation, or you could come into here to Luma versus saturation. It looks like the hair is living at the very, very end of the stage, so we can just turn that down. So happy with this image quality. This is in the middle of the day too. Very dark inside the cabin, very bright outside. The dynamic range is really impressive, especially for the age of this camera. Move on to the next shot. This is the one thing about this sensor that I think is objectively not great. The noise and the Super 16 depth of field, all these things are kind of subjective. You can work around them if you want to. Maybe it's the kind of look you're looking for. I don't know anyone who is looking for Moiré, and it is horrible on this sensor. That's this sort of weird rainbow effect you got here. If there's like a fine detail that you're taking a shot of, it's gonna display this weird aberration that we called Moiré. There's not a really easy or graceful way to get rid of this. I think there's some more advanced techniques, but chances are you're gonna run into this quite a bit. So you'll just have to keep an eye out for that. I know some people put black pro mist to kind of take off that digital edge, and maybe that helps with Moiré. If you're shooting like a fabric or a lot of times bricks on buildings will do this, keep an eye out for that. Okay, last shot that we're gonna go through. So we are wildly underexposed at 1600 ISO. What I'm gonna do is open up the curves, hit editable splines. I'm gonna bring the darkest point of our image up pretty high and then grab this little handle and create a ramp, and then we'll ease this down into a spot that we like. I don't know, maybe there. And then I'll grab the top and do something a little bit similar. This car is gonna enter the frame here, so the headlights might be brightest there. So we wanna protect the highlights. Get a little bit of an S-curve going here. I'm also gonna change this white balance a little bit closer to the night sky. I think it's okay if the headlights look super duper orange. Yeah, it's noisy, but again, it's a really, really pleasing noise pattern. This is one of my favorite noise patterns I think I've ever seen out of any digital sensor. In terms of image quality as a whole, you're not gonna have to worry about rolling shutter. If you're whipping the camera around, you're gonna see it, but it's not that much of an issue. Dynamic range is not gonna pose any issues either. It's not 20 stops, but you will have the latitude that you need to work with most of the shots that you need. Color science is really special. I think that it's a really great look. Some people don't. It's totally up to you. A lot of times color science I think is kind of subjective. It is Cinema DNG RAW. There is a ton of detail here, so you can bring it into Resolve or whatever NLE you're using and push the image around and get exactly what you want. I think the sharpness is great for HD. It's obviously not 4K, but it's a really sharp HD image, which I think sort of lends itself to that soft kind of filmy look. I would watch out for Moiré. That's the only thing that's really a shame about this sensor, and there's not an easy way to work around it in post, or maybe if there is, you should put it in the comments because I really am interested. Don't expect it to be an A7S III. You can't go outside and bump it up to 12,800 and shoot a short film in the moonlight, but if you do have to shoot in low light, it's much better than I think everybody remembers. I had it in 1600 for most of the shots that I got, and it performs really, really well. The shadows feel very smooth to me. The highlight roll-off is very smooth. The overall image quality really is super impressive. By the way, something Blackmagic really knows how to do well is make a simple and effective menu structure. This is a much older OS than the current Blackmagic cameras, but it still works really great. There is one singular SD card slot within the battery compartment, and it's a picky one. I'll link some helpful resources in the description that should help you pick out a card, and I'll also link the one that I bought, and it works great. On one side of the camera, we have a pretty simple array of ports. There's a 3.5mm in and out, a micro HDMI, a 12V DC in, and a 2.5mm LANC for camera control. On top of the camera, there's some playback controls for watching footage back, and below that, we have some very simple and very satisfyingly clicky buttons to talk about. There's a directional pad, focus, iris, menu, and power. That's all there is to worry about. Having such a minimal selection of controls has some downsides, the most notable being the fact that you have to go into the menu every single time you want to change ISO, but I also find it refreshing. The Pocket Cinema camera is unapologetically simple in all of its ways. There aren't a whole lot of assist features, no autofocus, no IBIS, no slow motion. It's all up to the operator to get the shot. And I think in the long run, a camera like this trains your ability as a filmmaker better than a well-equipped one. The OG Pocket will reward you if you do everything right, and punish you if you don't. On one hand, there's a lot of options out there that are more capable and more versatile for client jobs. They'll make your life easier. This camera will give you actual nightmares with its battery life, screen, and crop factor. But it also just might make you a better filmmaker all the while. Should you shoot modern projects with a camera this limited, my hat goes off to you. The only thing I know for sure is I love the original Pocket Cinema camera. $600 USD isn't a lot to spend on something as special as this.